Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Audit Committee of Perth and Kinross Council. Apologies for a slight delay due to technical issues in starting this meeting. Can I, first of all, welcome, in addition to welcoming members and officers, can I welcome Michael Wilkie and Christopher Windiat from our auditors, KPMG, to this session. You're very welcome, gentlemen. Now, can I ask if there are any apologies this morning?
Yes, Convener, we have an apology from Councillor Harry Coates.
Thank you. Okay, can I ask you now to take a roll call, Kirsten, please?
Yes. Morning, members. When I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you are present. Councillor Drysdale, we've heard from yourself. Councillor Donaldson.
Present.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
Present.
Councillor McCall.
Present.
And Councillor McDade. I don't think we have Councillor McDade in yet, but we're trying to get him into the meeting. So thank you. All members except Councillor McDade are present, Convener.
Okay, thanks very much, Kirsten. Okay, if I can now move on to item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest, and if I can start the ball rolling by saying that I will declare a non-financial interest in paper 8, the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership, and Councillor Donaldson will assume the chair for that item. Are there any further declarations of interest? No. As I say, I'm not seeing the chat at the moment, so if somebody can shout out if there are any, that would be helpful, but I'm assuming there are none at the moment. Okay, so now we are moving on to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minute of the special meeting of the Audit Committee on 30th June 2021. Are there any comments or observations on that draft minute? Councillor Donaldson. You're on mute, Stuart.
Sorry about that. Right, thank you, Convener. It's actually just on page 7 of the minute on Strategic Risk Register, and I asked last time about the availability of the Risk Register and other service level registers. And Lisa, you advised that the will be updated to the register will be updated to the public portal. I had a look on the PKC website, typed in register, risk register, strategic risk register. Has that not happened yet, or?
Stuart is available. Answer that, or anybody can answer that one.
Apologies, Convener. My colleague appears to be offline for a second. I think we'll just check to see if that's been updated, Councillor Dawson. So we'll just.
It was 3 months ago. Well, nearly 3 months ago. I was just wondering. Yeah, I certainly couldn't find it on the website, and you know, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place.
Apologies, I'm not familiar. Sorry, I'm not aware of the answer to
No,
your question.
no. I see.
Okay, thank you.
Lisa's now back.
Sorry, I lost Teams completely, and I'm just now back online. Was there a question?
Yeah, it's from myself, Lisa.
Sorry, Councillor.
Not at all. No, these things happen, and I think 1 or 2 of us have had IT issues. I asked at the last meeting about the Strategic Risk Register and about its availability. Now, I had a look at the Perth and Kinross website and searched under Register, Risk Register, Strategic Risk Register. Am I right in saying that hasn't been uploaded onto the system yet?
Has it not? Sorry, I'll see to that. I'll see to that. Apologies.
And I think there's also going to be eventually, and I think you're looking for a new going for a new computer system or program or software program, but also the service level registers are going to be on that as well.
Yeah, that might take a bit more time, but we can definitely get the strategic risk register published. That's not a problem at all. So
Okay.
that's just been an oversight. Apologies. I'll take responsibility for that one.
No. I couldn't find it, and I was wondering if I'd been looking in the wrong place. Right. Okay.
Okay. I think as well, okay, so first of all, can I take the minute of the meeting of the special meeting of the Audit Committee of 30 June 2021 as being approved? Is that agreed?
Approved.
Thank you.
Agreed.
And I think it would be convenient as well at this point to take item P1 at this point also. Which is the minute of the special meeting which was held in private of the Audit Committee on the 30th of June. Members have that draft minute before them, and I wonder if we can take that minute as approved.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, moving on therefore to item 4 on the agenda, a substantive piece of business this morning, which is the draft audited annual accounts 21-22 and the draft annual audit report to the members of Perth and Kinross Council and the Controller of Audit for the year ended 31 March 2021. First of all, can I ask Mr. Stuart Mackenzie, Head of Finance, to present his report, please? Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. The committee is requested to note the contents of KPMG's draft annual audit report to the members of Perth and Kinross Council and the Controller of Audit for the year ended 31st of March 2021 and approve the 2020-21 audited accounts for signing together with a letter of representation. The Council's accounts remain substantively unchanged from those approved by the committee on the 30th of June. 3 audit differences were identified through the audit, and these are detailed in Appendix 3 to the auditor's report. These adjustments do not change the Council's financial performance in 2021, and the level of uncommitted reserves remains as previously reported at £8.2 million, or approximately 2% of net budgeted expenditure. As reported to Council in March, and in common with all Scottish local authorities, Perth and Kinross Council reported an increase in its overall reserves position as at the 31st of March, due largely to the scale and timing of Scottish Government funding for COVID-19. Whereas funding has been earmarked by Council for recovery and renewal, the level of uncommitted reserves remains at the lower end of the range set out within the approved reserve strategy. My recommendation to Council will therefore be to address this as part of the revenue budget to ensure that going forward, uncommitted reserves remain sufficient to allow for the effective management of the Council's expenditure and to enable the Council to respond to events such as severe weather. Members will appreciate that the scope of the audit is more than just the accuracy of the financial statements, and the wider scope and best value section of the auditor's report includes commentary on financial management, financial sustainability, governance and transparency, and value for money. The completion of the 2019-20 financial statements in the period immediately following lockdown in March 2020 required a different approach to both preparing and auditing the accounts, and that learning has been carried forward into this year's process. However, the challenges of preparing the accounts for 2020-21 have been greater due to the ongoing pressure on colleagues of responding to the pandemic and the unique experience of an entire year of working remotely. The positive commentary within the auditor's report should provide all elected members with reassurance that the Council's governance arrangements, financial management and controls have remained resilient. Following approval by the committee, I would propose to report on the 2020-21 accounts to Council on the 6th of October. Excuse me. I would take this opportunity to thank both my own team and colleagues from across the Council for their support in the preparation of the Council's accounts. I would thank Alison O'Brien and Scott Walker for their leadership of this exercise. And I would also express my own and my colleagues' appreciation of the approach adopted by our external auditors, with early engagement on potential issues and a recognition of the unique circumstances under which the Council operated in financial year 2021. Colleagues and I are happy to take questions, Convener. However, I understand that the committee will be keen to hear from Mr. Wilkie.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That's much appreciated, and if I can just add on behalf of the committee, thanks to yourself, your entire team, and indeed all officers for the sterling efforts to pull together the accounts in normal time, notwithstanding the significant logistical and other issues that you've had to contend with. And we, Perth Kinross Council, is very fortunate to have a team under your leadership conducting the audit on an annual basis. So thank you to yourself and your team.
Thank you, Peter.
I wonder if we can also now then move on to before taking questions just on the accounts, I wonder if we can also receive a report from Mr. Wilkie and Mr. Windiat in terms of their external audit overview, and then we can take a session of questions on both papers, if that would be convenient. Mr. Wilkie.
Thank you. I'll provide a brief summary of our report, which starts on page 137 of the papers. This is our annual audit report, so presented on completion of the annual external audit, and follows the presentation of our strategy and update paper previously in the year. And with thanks to management for their continuing support in being able to reach this position, remains a challenge, particularly continuing to work remotely, and it's fair to say across all of my audits that we have probably found this year more challenging, as have bodies themselves, with effectively a whole year's built up work going behind the scenes, not just in finance, but in other areas, making the audit that bit more challenging. So it's an excellent position to have reached on time. The key conclusions are summarised on this page, and ultimately the main one is that I intend to issue an unqualified opinion following approval of the financial statements by members. At the outset of the audit, we identified significant risks. The first two are presumed to exist in any audit. That's the fraud risk from management's ability to override controls, and having completed our testing, we found no such instances. And the second is the presumed risk in respect of fraudulent expenditure recognition. In respect of that risk, we focused our testing around journals and also on cut-off of expenditure focused around the year end to make sure that it was recognised in the correct period. And again, our testing was satisfactory. I'll come to the other significant risks by their specific pages because they are more detailed. I'll just say at this point, we're also satisfied with management's conclusion that the Council continues to be a going concern, although they are required to prepare on a going concern basis unless there's an intention to wind the Council up. We have 3 audit misstatements, 2 of which have been adjusted, and 1 which is unadjusted that I don't consider to be material, so satisfied that remains unadjusted, and 2 grade 3 control recommendations. From page 141 onwards, we focus on the significant risks, and I've mentioned those first 2 that are presumed to exist in any audit. The first, which is specific to the Council, although is in common with a number of my other audits and other local authority audits, is in respect of the revaluation of fixed assets. That's page 143. We use our own valuation specialist to support our audit in this respect, and that includes reviewing the competency of the Council's valuer, reviewing and challenging the assumptions, the approach to valuation, the categorisation of assets, therefore the basis of their valuations, and then we consider a sample of specific assets. In the current year, there was also additional audit challenge. So in advance of the audit, we asked management to carry out an exercise to consider continued validity of the assets which have not been revalued in the year, because there's a rolling 5-year cycle. There will always be a large majority of assets which are not revalued in the current year. Management carried out that exercise and we're satisfied with the conclusion. And we also furthered what management had done with their own specific testing of individual assets, looking at how construction cost indices have moved between the time they were last revalued and the current year-end date. And then during the year, we additionally challenged management in respect of the extent to which heritage assets are recognised on the balance sheet versus not included in the balance sheet. And following that, we've required an additional management representation and disclosure in the financial statements, but there's been no change to the financial statements themselves. From page 145 onwards, we consider the valuation of pension liabilities, which is the second significant risk. Again, in this area, we use our own actuarial specialists. That includes benchmarking against other organisations at the same date. And our conclusion is ultimately that we consider management's assumptions to be broadly balanced when compared to our normal ranges. And on page 146, we've also considered various other aspects, claims or matters which we understand are affecting LGPS schemes, and we set out our positive conclusions on a number of those. Largely that for the most part, that whilst there are ongoing matters which may affect liabilities in the future, we consider that they are too uncertain or unable to be able to quantify at the current point in time to include in the accounts. I won't go into the rest of our report in detail, but there is a number of pages in there which consider our conclusions on wider scope aspects of the audit, all our conclusions being satisfactory. Our conclusions in respect of the preparation of the accounts, which we consider are well prepared, on time, and with good support from management to our queries and challenge throughout the audit, and then a small number of low-graded recommendations towards the end. I'll maybe just stop there and we can take questions on the accounts together with management or on our report as it stands.
Eric, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Still can't hear you.
We still can't hear you.
Oh, help. Yeah.
Hopefully somebody can hear me now.
Yeah.
It's got a life of its own, this machine today, I'm afraid. Thank you, Mr. Wilkie. Very much for your report and your overview of the accounts and the audit process. Before moving on to questions from members, can I welcome Councillor McDade, who has managed to get in, having some technical difficulties of his own, I believe. Welcome, Xander. If the minute can show that Councillor McDade joined the meeting at item 4, that would be helpful. So moving on to questions, and as I say, I cannot see any Q&A, or I can't see anything in the chat. So
there are no questions as yet, convener.
Thank you, Lisa. And so therefore we move on to questions now. And if when you're asking a question, if you can be clear at the start of your question, please, whether you're directing your question towards Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Wilkie, Mr. Windiat, or anybody else, that would be very helpful. Councillor Donaldson, I saw you with your hand up. So Councillor Donaldson, over to yourself.
Unless there's anyone else that's got a question.
You go.
Okay. Right, you mentioned, Michael, at the start about fraud risk and the importance there. Lisa, I have to come back to you again. We talked about the strategic risk register, and I know you've got it as grade 3 as minor, Michael, Chris, in your report, but it states there was no mention of fraud on the strategic risk register as of 24th of June. Is that something that's going to be amended?
I'm happy to answer that, convener.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
The strategic risk register works on the basis of high risks being captured. So we work by exception. going through in terms of looking from operational level right the way through to strategic risk register level, and it would only be on the strategic risk register if it was recognised as a risk that was of high level and was being where other measures were being put in place to manage a particular risk. We do not have a particular high risk around fraud. These are maintained through tight and ordinary business practices, and it would only be if there was something that came out by way of an audit observation or such that gave us any concern about our ability to effectively manage these type of risks through our operational business, that they would then find themselves on the strategic risk register with active extra measures for mitigation. We are managing the fraud risk competently and effectively within our ordinary business practices, so there's no need for that, in my opinion, to be flagged as a particular strategic risk which requires extra mitigating measures. And I think that our effective management of that risk has been reflected in the audit response.
Could I just then ask Michael or Chris, you're satisfied with that it's not something that, that systems and controls are in place, that you're relaxed about that, it's not actually on the risk register?
Yes, I'm satisfied with the conclusion, and the reason we'd raised it was following Audit Scotland guidance, which had in it a presumption that the risk would be included in at a strategic level, and that's therefore why we raised the point. But
and the risk is managed at a strategic level, but it does not require, in our opinion and our assessment, following our analysis and risk assessment, of any extra ordinary measures which are required to mitigate that particular risk, and that risk is being managed effectively throughout the business processes of the organisation, but that is continually monitored.
Okay.
In that case, with that response, I would suggest we update our report with that response and close the point.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions, Lisa, that you can see?
No. Oh, there's now a question from Councillor Illingworth.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, we've had some very thought-provoking and interesting presentations from senior management about the impact of construction inflation on our capital programme, but I can't see any mention of this risk anywhere in the audit. Can anybody? Is this something that people have considered in terms of this audit, or indeed should it be in part as considered as part of the audit?
I can answer first.
Thank you, Michael.
Very much conscious of the increasing construction costs impacting a number of my clients, not just the local authority sector. Until that cost has an impact on delivery of projects, and that delivery of those projects has an in turn impact on operational matters, and whether that's the cost of operations or ability to deliver, then I think it's a lower impact on our audit. So it's one I'll keep a watching brief on for future audit risk consideration, but to date, that is largely why our report is silent on it. It hasn't impacted our audit, and I wouldn't have expected it to.
Stuart Mackenzie would like to come in, convener.
Thank you. Actually, if I can just say that I've managed to find the chat on a separate device, so thanks. I seem to have that now. Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, convener. And just to supplement Mr. Walkie's answer, I think in response to Councillor Illingworth, where this will manifest itself is in the Council's budget strategy going forward, and members will be aware of it. We've had, as Councillor Illingworth has alluded to, a number of presentations on the challenges in our capital investment going forward, and the recommendations from officers will follow from that. So I think it's perhaps going to be more immediate in terms of budget going forward, and perhaps a risk in the sense of Mr. Walkie's report at this point in time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Donaldson, I think you had another question. I don't see any other cues in the chat at the moment.
Everyone else does have then. Okay, I just want to ask, I was going to ask about transformation, but I think that may come up later in the agenda. I do have a separate question on Stuart for warning on pensions, but it's a post-balance sheet position, the Tayside Pension Fund. But I do want to ask about heritage assets, because if you look in the accounts, it is quite a material item, page 81. Compared to the year previously, when the value of those assets was 27.7 million, there's a revaluation 24 million. Now the total value is 51.7. It's something the KPMG have pointed out. They've made it as fairly, it's minor, not a major issue. But how much further, how much do we estimate that those assets are still undervalued, and just the general position on this? Stuart, I think, or
thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Dawson. I'm happy to provide a response. I wonder if my colleague Donald Coyne is on the call. Donald, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm here, Stuart. Yeah.
Could you provide some context, please?
Yes, sure. Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So the story behind the heritage assets is we've always had the heritage assets on the balance sheet. The heritage assets on the balance sheet comprise of the art and applied artworks for the museum and gallery collections. Now, during 2021, these were reassessed by the curators and the values have been uplifted, and that's what we have got in the balance sheet now. So that 51.7 million you talked about is the value of the fine applied art collection. Now, you'll also be aware that included in the museum and gallery collections are natural history and social history collections. Now, these comprise of approximately 289,000 items, and the code, the CIPFA code, which goes back to FRS 30, heritage assets, does allow you to include these assets in the balance sheet when cost or value is known. Now, the issue with the natural history and history collections is the nature of the objects. They're so diverse, they're unique, they're rare on some occasions, and there is no comparable market value for them. Whereas with the fine and applied art, you can go to the likes of an auction house and you can see what a comparable painting is worth at the current time, and the estimate for that is reliable. So what we're saying is the fine and applied art, yeah, that's great, we'll include them in the balance sheet because we do have comparables there. Natural history and history collections, for example, the mummy, the Kakapoa cloak, the Tahitian feather head cloak, things like these they're rare and there is no comparable evidence. So for that purpose, we don't include them in the balance sheet. I don't know if does that answer your question, Councillor? Or?
I think it does. I think you've got de minimis, what's it, 10,000 for the value, and there's no one expect you to value 289,000 items, of course not. But there are a number of items there, maybe even just a handful of items that do have probably quite considerable value. But you're saying that the bulk of these is well now impossible to get a true and fair value. Is that right? Yeah,
that's fair. That's a fair comment, Councillor. In terms of, I mentioned a couple of objects there, the Tahitian Mona costume, the Kakapoa cloak. Well, in terms of the cloak, there are only 2 in the world. The Tahitian Mona costume, I think there's maybe 5 in the world. So these items will never be, or they're very unlikely to be traded. So it's unrealistic to actually place a value in these kind of items. And the code does allow you, and the FRS 30 does say as well, if the cost of actually obtaining these values or estimates, is in excess of any advantage or usability for the reader of the accounts, the code does allow you to not include these in the accounts.
So going forward, am I then right in saying that value that we're showing now, 51.7 million, you know, obviously adjusting with fine art for market values and so on, but that probably we're not going to see kind of the step change that we've seen over the last year where the valuation, and it's a difference of 24 million. We're not going to see that degree of revaluation going forward.
Well, you could, potentially you could, because it depends who's in vogue at the time with the fine and art world, you know, the fine and applied art, you know, this is why heritage assets is just so, it's quite hard to place a value on, to be honest, because, you know, the nature of the beast is, you know, somebody might be in vogue next year, you know, and the demand could increase, but in terms of the collection, you know, we know everything that's in the collection in terms of fine and applied art. So if there was going to be any movement, it would relate to fine and applied art. But the curators, they know themselves what's happening in the art world. They obviously know who's in vogue, etc. And if that were to actually have an impact on the value it's held in the council's balance sheet. So, I mean, it's something we look at every year. And I suppose as well, the code doesn't help in the fact that you don't have to revalue, say, every 5 years like we do with property, plant and equipment. But with heritage assets, we would keep an eye on it. And if we thought there was going to be any movement, we would review and reassess the values.
I don't know if anyone else wants to come in, but I hear what you say. And but it's just, on, you know, it does come out at you on the accounts. It is quite a material item, quite a difference with the 1 year. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
I can just add on the audit context, if that's okay.
Of course.
Just to be clear, the movement in value in the current year is not because a portfolio of assets has been valued which wasn't previously. That is just the movement in the assets which have already been valued, and that is their valuation movement. So there could be further significant movement if there is movement in those values. We challenged management quite significantly on the extent to which assets are included in the balance sheet versus excluded, and whether there are other assets which are not currently included but over which an insurance amount has been obtained should be included or not. And we've ultimately concluded that we're satisfied that they are not, and that an appropriate value can't be obtained. We have agreed with management some additional disclosure in the notes to explain that there are other assets held for which a value hasn't been obtained and hasn't been included in the accounts, and management representation on the same point has been included this year in our representation letter.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkie, I appreciate that. And thanks for the answers to Councillor Donaldson's questions. You satisfied with that, Stuart?
Yes, I am. Yes, fine.
Thank you. Now I have a question from Councillor McDade.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick one for Mr. Wilkie. It's on the page 29 of their audit report. It's under best value focus areas, and obviously there's a lot in the best value to unpack, but it's under equalities and it's rurality. And it says, we consider that the Council's approach to tackling inequalities is robust and continues to reduce inequalities across the region. And I recall Mr. Wilkie did come attend during, I think, one of the meetings of my local action partnership before COVID. But I just want to get a bit more of a feel for what the basis for that conclusion is, because whilst I would say the council does quite a lot on equalities, I'd say a lot of that is focused towards what I would call urban, inequalities, as opposed to rural ones. I can't say I've seen an awful lot on the rural side, so I'm just curious as to what the basis for that conclusion was.
Sure, it largely continues based on the work that we conducted as part of the full best value report. So the conclusions in our wider scope area are conducted over what would usually be the 5 years of our appointment, culminating in the best value audit report. So there's not significant work continued beyond what we did as part of the BV that included looking at everything from resource planning through to, as you mentioned, my attendance at the local area partnership meeting. But what we do continue to be alert to is whether it's on, for example, agenda challenged by committee members and committees that we attend. And two key things I would cite that I've seen is that it does continue to be raised by members in meetings in general, and also there was evidence that it was considered as part of the consideration of impact of COVID-19 on the council and on changes to its budget. So those are the two key aspects which have driven a continued conclusion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from members on this item? I have a couple myself, if I may, and quite narrow focused for yourself, Mr. Mackenzie, or one of your colleagues, perchance. Note 26 to the accounts on page 84 of our papers references long-term debtors. It's a relatively small figure, 689,000, and it's a reduced figure. Long-term debtors to other entities and individuals, and I'm just wondering if you can clarify what falls under this, or what are the main items that fall under this category.
I wonder if my colleagues should perhaps pick that point up, convener. Alison or Scott, perhaps.
Scott or Alison or anybody. We can perhaps come back to that one while I ask my second question.
So, Councillor Drysdale, we don't have that level of detail to hand. It's a long list as part of our working papers. We can circulate that round the committee if that would be okay with you after the meeting.
Yeah, no worries. It was just to see if that was a lot of small items, or if it's a major item. And I see Alison may have an answer now. Alison.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of larger items, our mortgages that we operate, and also our interim funders. So that's when we provide social care, but we have the houses as backup for when we receive the payment. So that's two of the larger items that are in there.
That's, I guess, what was behind my query. I was just wanting to establish if that was the case. So thank you for that. Another item just on the now this is on page 101 of our papers, or page 80 of the accounts, in relation to the housing revenue account, and I notice that the rent arrears figure has increased, not surprisingly, I suppose, in all the circumstances, from 7.3% of income, 1.982 million last year, to 9.6% of income this year, which equates to 2.7 million. Can I ask, is that a continuing trend, or are we seeing that peak now and come back, and what processes are being undertaken to deal with these areas? Are we taking a patient approach in all the circumstances?
Thank you, convener. I'll endeavour to provide an answer. So my understanding is that the sort of pressures we've seen in other income streams are manifesting themselves on council rents, as you can imagine, that our tenants are experiencing the impact of COVID in the same way that everybody else is. So we did see a reduction in collection levels last year. That pressure will continue. In terms of mitigation, members will be aware that there's a tenant support fund, and there's continuing engagement with council tenants to provide appropriate support. The council also has other support arrangements in place to support those families on particularly low incomes. So I think that challenge will remain, and we will continue to monitor the position on an ongoing basis and update committee appropriately as and when we have that information. But I think the challenge remains. the council has sought to put in place mitigation, and we're mindful of the pressures on our tenants. So in terms of follow-up, it's engagement first rather than enforcement. I think if I could put it that way.
No, that's helpful, Stuart. Thank you for these comments. I had one final, not so much a question as a point to make, and I think I raised the same issue last year, but I see the same, what I think is the same wording this year. And it's just for accuracy. I'm not precious about it anyway, but on the remuneration report, remuneration of senior councillors at 3.5, there continues to be a sentence in that says that no councillors from Perth and Kinross Council served as a convener or vice convener of a joint board. I'm wondering what I've been doing all year, but I wonder if that could be corrected. If not now, then certainly going forward.
That's a fair observation, convener. Noted.
Okay.
And I think to answer your one question, you've been quite busy.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Are there any further questions? I think Councillor Donaldson, you had something else.
Right, just one final question. Stuart, I can't go without asking you something on pensions, but it's a post-balance sheet position. We know where we are placed with the pension fund on the triennial review, what our contributions should be. But over the last month, I've seen stuff from the Tayside Pension Scheme. This is on a revised funding strategy. I think there's a meeting of the pension subcommittee today, and this is about some of the participants in the scheme leaving. It gets quite technical, but are there any risks for us, Stuart? And I think it's yourself I probably would ask, or maybe Scott, I'm not sure, with that revised funding strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson, for your question, and it's a fair point. So we've had no intimation of any change in employers' contribution rates, and that would be our primary budgetary concern. I think that's perhaps what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
A number of participants or admitted bodies to the scheme have been reflecting on the cost of their participation in the circumstances. So we could see potentially a number of those bodies reviewing their arrangements and their ongoing membership of a scheme, but we haven't had any confirmation of that. But you're absolutely right, there's been some correspondence on that. It's a risk that colleagues who are minister of a scheme in Dundee have flagged up. So I think it's a watching brief on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly think because if there were several participants who withdrew from the scheme, then it's about valuation on the basis of guilts and so on. It gets terribly complex, but it could have, certainly be helpful to be updated. There was a possibility that it could see an increase in the council's contributions, because that would be quite significant. It could be significant. Yeah.
It tends to be smaller organisations, in fairness, who perhaps are their impact would be commensurate with the size of a participating organisation that was looking to review its position. But I think it's a little bit of a trend, and we just want to understand it a bit better. But my understanding is that colleagues in Dundee are in discussion with those bodies to clarify their position.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, if there are no further questions on this item, then it's recommended that the committee notes the contents of KPMG's draft annual audit report to the members of Perth and Kinross Council and the Controller of Audit for the year ended 31 March 2021, and that the committee approves the 2021 audited annual accounts and authorise the Leader of the Council, the Interim Chief Executive and the Head of Finance to sign them, and also authorise the Head of Finance to sign the letter of representation. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. And once again, if I may just thank everyone involved in compiling the both reports for their efforts in these difficult and extraordinary circumstances. Thank you once again.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Councillor McCall, you have a comment.
No, it was literally just to follow on from what you just said, convener, and thank you very much for allowing me to do so. It's been an extraordinary time over the past 12 months, and our team have done a phenomenal job, and so have the auditors, and it really should be recognised. We know that they're a small team and they've been under an incredible amount of stress and strain to pull all this together, and as usual, our financial position is excellent. So I just really wanted to reiterate that and to raise my thanks to the team for all the work that they do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor McCall. Okay, we now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the Internal Audit Annual Report and Chief Internal Auditor's Opinion for 2020-21. If I can ask the Chief Internal Auditor, Jackie Clark, to speak to her report, please. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, convener. The Public Sector Internal Auditing Standards requires an annual opinion, and this report fulfills that requirement. It's summarised as internal audit activity for the year 2020-21. And it also highlights that the management's responsibility for devising and implementing appropriate control, risk management and governance arrangements. Section 2 highlights the resourcing and the assurance for 2020-21, with Section 3 highlighting the Council's internal audit service continuing with its compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. Section 4 details the annual opinion, which elected members will be keen to read, and reasonable reliance can be placed on the Council's risk management, governance and systems of internal control. I'm happy to take any questions that you have on this report.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, are there any questions? I'll give it a few moments for it to appear on my phone. I'm not seeing any questions coming through. Okay, if there are no questions on this item, first of all, can I thank Jackie and her team for the efforts throughout 2020-21 as well. This has again been very difficult circumstances, and the committee is fully aware of the efforts that you have taken and your colleagues have taken in terms of the pandemic response and being diverted into other emergency and support functions in addition to your own roles. So on behalf of the committee, again, if I can thank you, Jackie, and please pass on to your colleagues for your efforts in that regard.
Thank you, convener. I'll pass those messages on.
Thank you, thank you. And so therefore it is recommended that the committee notes the content of this report and specifically the audit opinion at section 4. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. Okay, moving on swiftly to item 6 on the agenda, which is the internal audit follow-up. And again, Jackie, if I can ask you to speak to this as well, please.
Thank you, convener. This is the first substantive report since lockdown, although updates relating to significant reports and significant findings have been considered throughout the pandemic at Audit Committee. 6 actions have a completion date of up to the end of June 2021 and are detailed in the appendix These actions have yet to be completed, and revised dates are included within the appendix. The ongoing response of the Council and various services to the COVID-19 pandemic does continue to impact on some of the actions. I'm happy to take any questions on this paper, or services may wish to respond to any other questions that councillors have.
Okay, thank you again, Jackie. And if there are any questions, please type a Q in the chat. And before asking any questions that you may have, if you can indicate whether you would wish to ask that of Jackie or officers from the respective services to clarify any points you might have, that would be helpful. So again, I shall wait for a Q to appear in the chat function. I shall give it 30 seconds or so. Oh, and I didn't have to wait that long, so Councillor Donaldson, thank you.
Yeah, can I ask, because it's important to rate it as high, medium, the first part, the second part high, and that's in the school estate strategy. The thing that really struck me was the draft strategy document has not been updated since 2012, and that's 9 years ago. Just and if you look on the dates, you know, it's meant to be initially responses August 2019, the second part November 2019. Just how it is that we've now gone 9 years without a completely new strategy. I think that goes to, according to this, lifelong learning, the service asset management plan, and the other one in January 2022, but it does seem an inordinate amount of time. I'm not sure who wants to answer that.
Does anybody want to answer it? Jim, are you able to? Or
thank you, Councillor. Sorry, I'm not able to answer the detail of the reason why it's taken so long to get to this time. Unfortunately, I need to go back to Carol Taylor and get more detail and pass that on. I do know that the work is well underway for the January 22 paper going to Lifelong Learning Committee, certainly, but I don't know the history before that, unfortunately. It's not my responsibility. I shall try to get an answer for you, Councillor Dillon.
I'd be grateful, because the draft school state strategy that was approved in 2012 was to cover the period 2012 to 2017. But if you take from 2017 to now, that's a period of 4 years, perhaps 4 years plus. So one really does wonder what's been happening here.
Yes, I'll certainly get more detail for you and get back to you on that directly.
That would be helpful, and if you would please, Mr. Coburn, if you would circulate that to all members of the committee, yeah, that would be helpful.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Not getting any coming through. Okay. Oh, Councillor Donaldson, another one.
Nobody else is going to come in. The other one, and it's partly personal experience, because what happened at Cleat Depot earlier this year, and the health and safety letter, so it's something we've got to be really conscious of, and the health and safety executive really was, it has to be said, was highly critical. But just on that, there again, it was Audit Committee February 2020. We've got accepted, but you know, if we take the dates, 2022 times and then March 2022, so just what the state of play is there. Yeah.
Is anybody in a position to answer that one? Caroline.
I'm not sure here who's here from.
Sorry, Jackie. I see
Caroline's here from Communities may be able to answer.
Yeah, good morning everyone, and thank you, Councillor. I would just, with regards to the health and safety, obviously the review that was done earlier in the year, we obviously take all the recommendations on that very seriously, and I know there's plans in place to progress with all of that. With regards to the specific audit points here, I think the first point with regards to the contents of the first aid boxes has been addressed, and with regards to the training, there has obviously been a bit of an impact with the COVID and the training being available, which is done externally. So we are making moves to get people the training required there. And first and foremost, we will prioritise staff who are new to their roles and then follow up training, but it has been impacted by the external training that's been available throughout COVID. I hope that gives you some further information, but if you need anything more, please let me know.
Okay, thanks. It's the training aspect, I think, is that all employees in the service really are, they know what to do, where to find things, what to do, and that's crucial, as I say, given what happens in crew, and that sort of matters to me. Okay.
Absolutely, Councillor Donaldson, and we definitely will be prioritising staff, new staff, and follow-up training for all staff. We've definitely got that plan in place.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. If there are no further questions, then can we agree to note this report?
Agreed.
Splendid, thank you very much. Okay, moving on now to item 7, which is the internal audit update. And once again, Jackie, if I can ask you to do your stuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Convener. This report provides an update on previously approved internal audit plans with sections 1.3 to 1.4 highlighting areas which have been rolled forward from last year's into the current year's planned work from the audit plan that was approved back in June. Section 1.5 highlights that there was an audit which was considered as part of the Integration Joint Board's internal audit plan and is of note for Perth and Kinross Council as it has relevance for the COVID-19 related grants assurance. So that appears on this agenda today. In order to ensure that the report on Horsecross, a 2010, is as up to date as possible to reflect the updated arrangements, this report will be presented to the next meeting of the Audit Committee. The work has been substantially completed, but it doesn't, for fairness, needs to be updated for the current arrangements. Section 1.7 details the outcomes from the previous transformation audit. As members will be aware, this is an historic programme, and what is captured within this paragraph is a summary of the lessons to be learned from this programme which are being taken forward in the event of similar arrangements, particularly here looking at the role of political oversight and elected members' scrutiny and the potential for an enhanced role of scrutiny committee itself for considering programmes and project performance overall. I'm happy to take any questions or comments on this paper.
Thank you once again, Jackie. So again, I can invite questions to Jackie on this this paper. If you put a queue in the chat, I'll allow a few seconds for any questions to come through. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything coming through. Councillor Donaldson.
If nobody else is going to ask the question, I am. First of all, just a comment that I think we're all aware of the pressures the audit team's under, and I think I'm right in saying, President Jackie, from what was said earlier, out of a staff contingent of 4 auditors and 1 professional trainee, at present you're working with only yourself and the is it the deputy auditor?
And an auditor, yes.
Yeah, so you have 2 basically, what's it, 4.5 or 5 full-time equivalent. So I think, so I'm not being tolerably difficult. I think you are clearly the pressures there, and hopefully they can be resolved by the end of the year. Can I ask, on one of the reports, the transformation programme, we got under 1.7, the paragraph there. However, it was a major part, certainly the last administration and for a couple of years for the present administration. The transformation programme really was a key part of the council's work. Now we've moved away from that, but are we going to, I think there are almost certainly lessons to be learned as we move on to the offer and the investment blueprint. Is there going to be a more detailed substantive report on transformation? And I certainly recall, what was it, several months ago, there was going to be a report come to committee, and then it was kind of withdrawn at the last moment. I'm not sure why.
Part of the consideration for presenting a report, such as a transformation report, is for what lessons we can learn going forward as the transformation program itself is now historic. With regard to the offer and the blueprint, that's very much part of considerations for internal audit activity going forward, and we'll be looking to ensure that is covered in some areas going forward in future audit plans. With regard to the specific details of the transformation audit report, because it was so historic, and a lot of any of the detail was very historic, it was felt it really didn't add to the agenda. And the main areas really are the lessons to be learned, which is about taking forward things through the blueprint and the offer, and also about considering the enhanced role for actual programme performance through scrutiny committee, which is something which wasn't in place with the transformation programme. And I think that would be helpful for elected members to have that level of oversight and scrutiny.
Okay, I'll leave it then.
Thank you. And Jackie, if I may just, in the absence of any other questions from members, if I can just focus on the final point in your paper 1.8, which indicates that obviously the timetable for presentation of these reports is contingent upon successful recruitment to vacant posts, and I know the efforts that are being undertaken in that regard to bring in somebody soon and round about Christmas time for somebody else, and I wish you well in these efforts. So are we saying that, subject to that caveat about recruitment, that you remain confident that the audit plan can be completed during the term of this council, i.e. prior to the next local government elections in May 2022?
That's certainly my anticipation at the moment, and in the event of any significant issues with recruitment, I'll be looking at other sources to ensure that the plan can be completed within the time frame.
Thank you, I appreciate that. We have a comment, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I just wanted to say thank you again to Jackie and her very small team for everything that you have achieved in the face of so many challenges over the last year, and thank you very much. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor.
And I would of course echo that, and thank you for that. Can we agree to note the report?
Noted.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, now, as I indicated at the start of the meeting, I have declared a non-financial interest in item 8 on the agenda as chair of the Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board, and so I will now hand over the dealing with paper 8 to my vice convener, Councillor Donaldson. Stuart.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Eric. And this is the last item on the agenda because we've covered all of the minutes.
Vice Convener,
Convener, sure.
Can I please just draw your attention to Councillor McDade? He obviously wasn't here at the start of the meeting when declarations of interests were declared.
All right,
Indeed,
just come up on the screen. Councillor McDade.
Yes, if I can likewise declare an interest as a voting member of Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board, please.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Okay, I don't have a covering report on this paper. I've just got the paper itself. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this has already gone through the Audit and Performance Committee of the IJB. I think it was the 14th of September, probably Tuesday of last week. But I don't know if there's any council officer here who would like to speak to this report. I have one or two questions, but I will wait for others to come in as well. But are there any council officers? Jackie, do you want to say anything?
I can introduce the report and should be able to answer as many questions as I can. This is an audit of the provider sustainability payments and was part and is part of this suite of COVID-19 grants for local authorities to administer on behalf of Scottish Government, and was very clearly within the remit of the Health and Social Care Partnership, and as such was included within the audit plan for the IJB. It is being brought to the council for council's audit committee for noting through the information sharing protocol, where internal audit reports of relevance to either organisation are shared to the relevant audit committee. As you can see from this particular report, reasonable assurance is placed on the controls around the provider sustainability payments, which were developed and implemented at pace in quite a challenging environment in order to ensure that the sustainability of our commissioned service partners. There was 7 payments that were made to 64 suppliers. So as part of looking at individual payments, then we looked at the arrangements for those suppliers. So more than a greater than 10% sample was taken. From the actions that were included within the action plan, there is one area which is yet to be completed, and the rest have been completed. But this audit report really is very much brought to you for your information, as it does involve council officers' time and also council systems for making the payments.
So, Jackie, this report is more for noting rather than approving, because it's been approved by the audit committee of the IJB. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Right. Does anyone have any questions? Give it Councillor Drysdale, we'll give it 10 or 20 seconds. Councillor Barrett.
Yes, I appreciate this is just for noting, but in reading it, there are a lot of references to the service, which isn't defined. So it's not entirely clear from the report what bit of the organisation was being reported on. The bit in 2.6, it talks about policy commissioning in the finance sections, and then in 4.6, a good working relationship between the finance and commissioned services teams. I just found it could have been sharper and clearer about what it was reporting on. And I also wanted to check, Jackie, I don't know if you can confirm that all the actions, they've got target completion dates of May and June. What you indicated, one hasn't been completed?
That's correct. The it's the procedure document is not yet fully in place. It's in draft, but it's not completely finalised. But that is the one that is not yet fully complete. But the rest of the actions are fully completed. And apologies for if things were unclear. And I'll try and make sure that there's greater clarity in future.
Thank you.
You happy with that? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I just want to ask myself, Jackie, from what I can see, for what they did with the two types of payments, there really was a question of almost hitting the ground running. It had to put things into place rapidly, and I hear what you're saying about a procedure, not yet in place. Can I ask one thing? And you've got in the report 2.7 forecast up to February 2021 was the cost of such payments was of the order of 3.1 million. But those payments are still ongoing, yeah? Just what the current position might be. You're muted, Jackie.
Apologies.
No,
I don't know the current value, but I will find that out and pass that on to all elected members.
But this is still ongoing and may well be ongoing for quite a time, yeah.
Yeah, there is a possibility for that.
Right. Any further questions? Any comments? Okay, before I hand back to Eric to close the meeting, can we note?
Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah,
oh, sorry, I've just come up. Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah. Given the speed that this programme was put together, it's extremely gratifying to see such a clear report praising the process, and so that's a really good news story indeed. So thank you to everybody involved in this.
Anyone else? Right, can I just add to those comments? And Jackie, I think you did this report yourself, did you, or was it your?
And it was my colleague Lorna Ferguson who.
Just Lorna that did. But yes, I would just add to echo those sentiments, because yes, it suddenly it's something that hit us because of the pandemic, and you've not found much really to be critical of, but in general, it has worked well, and it's all tribute to the people involved. Right, can I ask the committee to, I think the words are to note this report, because it's already been used by the...
Agreed.
Noted.
Right. Okay, I'm now going to pass back to Councillor Drysdale. Eric.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for taking that item. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this meeting this morning. I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, and I thank all officers involved in the efforts to keep the show on the road over the last 12 months. Thank you once again on behalf of the whole committee. Okay, that's all. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for your attendance.